Hold on a second. Gotta unmute you. Hello? Hi. Okay. I moved closer to my Wi-Fi router.
Okay, let's go, Harry.
Why did you become a rabbi?
Okay, why did I become a rabbi? So, my story is probably a little bit different than a lot of other rabbis. I actually attended a Roman Catholic university called Georgetown, which is the oldest Catholic university in the United States. And it's run by the Jesuits. And so I had a lot of professors who were religious Catholics, and one in particular who was a Jesuit. His name was Father James Walsh, and he was a scholar of Bible, and we became really, really, really close. And he became my good friend and my mentor. But he was the kind of Catholic who believed that he did not think that everybody needed to be Catholic. He wanted me to be as good a Jew as I could be. And he taught me a lot, and he helped me to understand that religion could be a force for good in the world, and that through following our religious traditions, we could make a world of peace and make a world where poverty and racism and war are unknown, and that also it was possible to be, you know, really seriously a good intellectual person and also religious. And so I wanted to be as much like him as I could be, but of course being Jewish, so I wasn't going to become a Catholic priest. So I became a rabbi, but Father Walsh really, more than anybody else, was the person who set me on my path to being a rabbi. That was not my original plan when I went to university.
What special responsibilities do you have as a rabbi?
Okay, so I mean, it's a complicated job, okay? I have a lot of different things that I have to do. You know, I'm in charge of the religious life of the community. So, you know, I have to make sure I don't necessarily lead all the services myself, but I have to make sure that people, you know what the readings are and know what the liturgy is for the day, and all of those things, because, you know, it depends. We have a lectionary and things are different day by day and week by week. I run our Sunday school, so I supervise the teachers. I supervise the curriculum. I, you know, visit people when they're sick in the hospital. When people die, I do the funerals and I comfort their families. I do weddings. I do bar and bat mitzvahs, which are the ceremony that young men and young women have when they're 13 to symbolize their becoming adults in the eyes of the religion. And Miss Jenkins can tell you about those because she's been to a couple and she'll be to another one sometime in a little over a year. You know, I also represent the community in a lot of different ways. I mean, we have a very active interfaith association in the town where I live, and I'm one of the co-conveners of that association, along with an Anglican priest and a Muslim imam. And so, you know, we do a lot of stuff to bring people together and try and work to make this a better society as well, which is really tough the last few years. I mean, there's much more racism and anti-Muslim feelings in this country than there ever have been before. And it's really disturbing. And I think, for religious leaders, we have a responsibility to fight against the bad things that are happening in our country right now.
When you were young, did you imagine becoming a rabbi?
I did not. As I said in my answer to a previous question, it was when I was in university that I first thought about becoming a rabbi. And so, it's a long process. In order to go to the seminary where you study to be a rabbi, you first have to have a bachelor's degree from a university. And then it's 5 years beyond that until you finish the program and can become ordained. No, when I was a kid, I thought I would be a lawyer or maybe a newspaper reporter. Also because, when I was a kid, I mean, our rabbi, when I was growing up, he was very impressive. He had a very deep voice, and he was a great story. And we really, I mean, we kind of really thought the rabbi was God almost. And so, the thought that I could ever be that when I was a kid seemed pretty remote. But, it was only when I was in university that I started thinking about maybe becoming a rabbi.
Okay, what we might do is there's some questions here. So you can accept the step with your neck and happen. You have to do it quickly. We should about Ari and our listening skills. Eye contact, not looking around too much.
Why is the eternal light positioned above the ark?
Okay, I did not hear that question at all.
Do it again. Big loud, big voice.
Why is the eternal light positioned above the ark?
I still could not make it. Maybe Ms. Jenkins asked the question on your behalf.
Why is the eternal light positioned above the ark?
Why is the eternal light positioned above the ark? Is it represents the flame that burned in the temple at all times. So, I don't know what you guys know or don't know, right? But in the ancient times, there was a temple. And there was a light in the temple that was supposed to be kept burning at all times. So now we don't have the temple anymore. And the synagogue in some ways represents that. So some of the things that we have in the synagogue remind us of things that used to be in the temple. And so the light symbolizes, beyond that, I guess it symbolizes God's presence. And light is always a symbol of godliness in most religions. And so it symbolizes God's presence as well.
Why do Jews have a feast after their prayer ceremonies?
Why do we have a feast after our prayer ceremony? It's hardly a feast, but, it's a nice snack, I guess. But, fellowship is really important. And, in some senses, I think, the part after is just as important as the service itself. Just to get to spend time with people, both of our traditions teach us that the human beings are created in the image of God, right? Right? So human beings are created in the image of God. So therefore, fellowship and friendship and getting to know people is a really important part of that. So I think, you know, if people just come to services and then they rush out and just go home, we haven't really accomplished everything that we should be doing.
How many years of training does it take to become a rabbi?
Okay, so it's 5 years after university. In now more and more it's 6 years. Like they've added another year because you know, first of all, I mean, our holy books are in Hebrew, as you probably know. So you can't really become a rabbi. I mean, the first year for sure is mostly focused on learning Hebrew. I had spent some time in Israel when I was younger, so I knew Hebrew pretty well when I started seminary, but I also taught in a seminary for a year, and I can tell you that most of the students coming in don't know Hebrew real well. But, you know, there's a lot that you have to learn. So I went to school for 5 years. I was 26 when I finished the program, and that's when I was ordained. So I was, you know, ordained when I was 26. But I think in many ways, just like any other role, I mean, you know, if you ask your teachers, right, how did you really learn to be a teacher? I think they would say by being a teacher, right? I mean, you learn certain amount in school, but then you learn to put it into practice by doing it. So I was ordained when I was 26. I'm now 58. So I've been a rabbi for 32 years, and I think I'm finally, you know, learning how to do it.
Is there something similar to receiving the Eucharist in a Jewish religious ceremony?
Okay. Not really. I mean, in the sense that, you know, for Catholics, and, you know, as I mentioned, I went to a Catholic university. So, you know, I know a fair amount about the Catholic faith. And so for Catholics, you know, the Eucharist, I mean, that is the real presence of Jesus in the bread and in the wine. We don't have anything like that. I mean, we don't, you know, for us, people are people and God is God, and the idea of the incarnation, it doesn't make sense to us as Jews. I have to say that is the one thing in Catholicism that Jews have the biggest problem even understanding. So we don't have anything like that in that sense. Obviously, you know, as I said before, Jesus being Jewish, the symbols of celebration that he and his disciples would have had would have been bread and wine. So, you know, obviously, you know, the use of bread and wine in a religious ceremony comes out of Judaism. You know, and there are certain prayers that we say over the bread and over the wine. So, like, for example, if you're at a mass, right, and then so when the priest is consecrating the wine, what does he say? When supper was ended, he took the cup. Again, he gave you thanks and praise, right? I mean, that's the way they do it in the States. I don't know, you may have a slightly different wording in Australia, but those are Jewish rituals. I mean, Jesus was doing Jewish rituals, so that your Catholic Eucharist grows out of our Jewish rituals, but the meanings and the symbolism are quite different.
Why do some Jews wear the boxes on their forehead and some don't?
Okay, so Why some don't is because they're not that religious or they're not that observant. Um, those boxes, as you call them, are called in Hebrew tefillin, um, which doesn't really have an English translation. Um, but it says in the Bible, right? These words which I command you this day shall be upon your heart. Bind them as a sign upon your hand, and let them be a symbol between your eyes. Right? And we take that literally. So the boxes have words of scripture in them. And so we bind them to our arm and to our forehead, so that we're like literally wearing God's word as a symbol. Obviously, they're not worn all the time. They're only worn during morning services, so for about 45 minutes during the day. But people who don't, either because they're just not that religious, or they think it's weird, or it's, whatever. I mean, I will tell you that, when people who aren't Jewish see Jews wearing tefillin, that strikes them, I think, as odd. And, some people are not comfortable being different than everybody else.
Why is the Star of David so important for the Jewish people?
It's just a symbol of Judaism. I don't know that it's actually all that important, other than it's a recognized Jewish symbol. I mean, symbols are important, right? If you see the Star of David, you think of Jews, right? If you see a kangaroo, you think of Australia. I mean, at least we do. I don't know if you do. But symbols are important for, reminding people who they are. But it's not like it's sacred. The Star of David doesn't have the same value for Jews as, say, the cross or the crucifix does for Christians. But it's just, something by which we're known.
What happens if you damage or touch the Torah?
Okay, so two different questions, right? I mean, we are not supposed to touch the side of the Torah that has the writing on it. And that's actually, there's a very practical reason for that. Okay, a Torah scroll is written by hand by a scribe with special pens and special inks, and it's a very, very complicated process. And your finger has oils on it, and if you touch the Torah with your finger, it could smear the ink. And if the ink is smeared, then the Torah is no longer suitable for use in worship anymore. So that's why people are not supposed to touch it. If it's damaged, then that is a big deal. I will tell you that about 20 years ago, a man and his son the son was getting ready for his bar mitzvah, and so he was going to read from the Torah, and the father had a key to the synagogue, and they let themselves in, and they took the Torah out of the ark to practice it, and it was damaged. And there's certain, it depends, but certain types of damage mean that the Torah can't be used in services anymore, and therefore it has to be repaired. And if it has to be repaired, then, a specially trained rabbi, I can't do it because I don't know how. It's a special type of training. So, it cost that guy several $100s because he had to pay to get it fixed. And it was a complicated matter. Also, if people are present when if the Torah falls or is dropped or something like that, then they have to fast. And I mean, what people say is you have to fast for 49 days. Now, obviously, nobody can fast for 49 days and survive, right? But there's a fast of 49 days and people take turns. Like, I'll fast this day, you'll fast the next day, so on and so forth, until we get to 49 days. So it's a pretty big deal.
Why is the challah bread braided?
It's braided to symbolize that our lives are intertwined, that we're all involved with each other, and that, you know, so it's kind of a symbol of the human condition, right? We're all intertwined and involved with each other. Like there's a saying in the Talmud that if a bunch of people are in a boat, you don't have a right to take a drill and put a hole under your seat and say, well, you know, it's just under my seat. What does that have to do with you, right? I mean, obviously, if you put a hole under your seat in a boat, the boat's going to sink, not just your part of it. So we're all responsible for each other. And so that's why the bread is braided, to symbolize our inter-responsibility to each other.
Okay. No, before we... Okay, Max, your turn.
Is getting baptized or becoming Jewish the same as becoming Catholic?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. I mean, we do have what's known as mikvah, which is very similar to baptism. I mean, the Catholic baptism comes out of the Jewish process. So in that sense, it's similar. So I think that there are a lot of similarities. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what the process is for becoming Catholic, so I'm not sure that I can answer that more than that. The one difference I would say is that, right, everybody in the Catholic Church has to be baptized, right? I mean, there's no such thing as you're born Catholic, technically. You might be born to Catholic parents, but you have to be baptized, right? In Judaism, if your mother is Jewish, you are Jewish, period. You don't need any ceremony. And so that would be a difference. The kind of baptism that we're talking about is only for people who were not born Jewish and want to become Jewish. So that would be an important difference.
Okay, Ruben.
Please tell us about where you live in America.
Okay, so I live in a town called Montgomery Village and in Maryland, and we are a suburb of Washington, D.C. We're about 20 miles away from Washington, and a huge percentage of the people who live here work in Washington, D.C., and they either drive in, and the traffic here is just terrible. They either drive into the city, or they take the train, or they take the bus. A lot of the folks who live here work for the government. It's also a very, very diverse place. I mean, we have people who live here from every country in the world, people of every religion, people of every ethnic and religious background, so many different cultures, so many different languages, so many different religions. It's also economically very diverse. I mean, you know, I live around the corner from the family that Ms. Jenkins worked for, and we live, you know, it's a pretty nice neighborhood with pretty nice houses. And yet there are a lot of people around here who are not so wealthy. And, you know, but we like it a lot. I really enjoy living here.
Have you ever been to Australia?
I have, as a matter of fact. But not to your part of Australia. In 1985, so, you know, obviously, as you know, our seasons are reversed, right? So I was in Australia July, August, and September of 1985, which is summer here. So that was summer vacation before my last year of seminary. And I was an intern at a synagogue in Sydney. So I spent most of that time in Sydney. I visited Melbourne for about a week, and I spent a weekend on a sheep station in Yass, which is near Canberra. So I have been to Australia, and I loved it, although I almost got killed a few times when I tried to drive, because we drive, you know, on the other side of the street to you. So it was a little confusing. And one scary time when I found all the cars heading straight at me. But I eventually learned how to drive the other way. But yes, I have been to Australia, and I can even say g'day. And it was nice. I really enjoyed the 3 months that I spent in Australia. It's a beautiful country. Loved it a lot.
Just before we go,
Yeah.
sorry, Rabbi, just before we go, can I just get one person from the 3 classes, just because we want to get a photo with you on the screen, if that's all right?
That's fine. Absolutely.
Evan. Yeah, sort of near your shoulder on the other side. Over the side. Over, yeah. No, I haven't got you in yet. Jai, come over. It doesn't matter if you stand in front of that screen. Just stand in front of the computer. In front of the computer. Okay, here we go. Smile, Rabbi. Okay. Caitlin, can I have you out the front, please? You're going to have to kneel down to do this. You all listen, please.
On behalf of Year 5, we thank you for speaking to us today and answering all our questions.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a lot of fun, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I don't know, maybe one day I'll get to see you all face to face.
Let's give the rabbi a big clap.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Hey, nice to see you again.
You too.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Beautiful.